All right, if everyone could find their way back to their seats for our fourth and final talk of the night. Love that, thank you.
Okay, so quick show of hands, there's a couple ways this can go down. Is anyone actually planning on doing a code with me workshop? And they want to clone the repo, they want to type some code, they want to play around. Okay, we got one. I just need to know for pacing, and then there's content I can leave out, or there's deeper dives I can do. So I've got one. Anyone else? So maybe 2, 3. We got a couple people. Okay. So for starters, because internet might be slow and you're going to have to install npm packages, if you go to my GitHub, github.com/ZachButcher, that's Z-A-K. I'm a little weird. Go there. It should be this React atomic design demo. You scroll down, it's got this cool little welcome blurb. And then basically all you do, you can use npm or you can use yarn. Doesn't matter. But you'll have to do npm install, yarn install, and then run either npm start or yarn start. Cool. Let's jump into the presentation. Am I loud enough? Okay, so if anyone saw this at the Philly JavaScript Developers Meetup, I apologize. This is just a quick rundown so we can all get on the same page before we jump into atomic design. So this is a quick primer. So what I'm going to tell you about me. That'll be short, I promise. I'll tell you about Pariveda. That'll also be short. And then I'm going to talk about atomic design, and that's what we're here for. So it's not going to be short. So me. So you're either going to see that other picture or you're going to see this picture. And if you see one of those, it's probably me. I'm a software developer. I fly drones, the big ones, small ones, first-person goggle ones. And I kind of just love Philly, and I like using PH instead of F. I use a K instead of a CH. Weird with letters. This is how you can get a hold of me. ZachButcher.io. That's my website, my GitHub, Twitter. I'm on the Slack channel. I'm on the Discord. I'm trying to be everywhere. I'm a consultant for a consulting firm called Pariveda Solutions. We've got offices in 11 different cities. 10 of those are in the US. The newest one is in Toronto. So that's pretty cool. We're international. Yeah. We specialize in kind of anything IT, specifically software type related and data. We don't really do a lot of hardware stuff. That's not our strength. Yes, we are hiring. Right now, we do require about 6 months of actual experience. So sorry, anyone that wants to get in, wait a year or two when we're bigger, and then we'll be able to hire straight out of college, straight out of boot camp type people. And we're also not right next door to here. We're over at 16th and Market for now. We are moving offices soon. If you want to know anything more about Pariveda, because this talk isn't about Pariveda, come see me after the talk, message me on Twitter, Slack, whatever. I'll see you to the next meetup too. Cool. Okay, so we're going to prime this with kind of things that might sound familiar so you get in the mindset of why atomic design might be important. So have you ever been, your PO just comes over and he's like, all right, so we got this new page we got to build. And you know that product card that we put on the catalog search page? Well, we need the same one, but different on order details. Yeah, don't ask me why, but the font needs to be bigger. Okay? Oh, sorry, I messed up this slide. This one's for a user. So same data. Or same structure, just different data. I got overzealous there. Okay, or how about, that page, that one page? Can we just like make a copy? Yeah, I just don't like the layout of it, but this other page like mostly needs to fit that same layout. I just wanted it to be similar. Or how about this one? I'm actually dealing with this right now, my current project. I like that primary color, but instead of blue or like green, like let's do like purple. And let's change that everywhere. And I need that tomorrow. So we don't have to go through all these. Looking familiar, this is like naming conventions. Who's got files that just start with like card with, card with, card with, button with. That's really fun. We're trying to avoid this. We're also trying to avoid this. This is production code. It is 250 line render function. And I couldn't zoom my editor out any further to like fit the import statement. So I chopped all those off. We're also trying to avoid this because this is unmaintainable. Yes, it may work, but someday it may break and someday you're gonna have to fix it. So atomic design, if we're talking about atomic design in the context of React, we're really talking about two different things. We're talking about like UI libraries that you build with tools, whether it's Angular, Vue, React, vanilla HTML, and CSS, hopefully not jQuery. But that's kind of the focus of what React tries to solve. Design system is more of where atomic design comes in. And what you're really thinking about is how to break down complex systems into shared language, into design tokens, into reusable pieces that it's when you see that text, you're like, oh, that's a title font, or oh, that's my H1 tag, like however you want to label it, make sure that everyone's talking the same language. And that's what we're going to talk about with atomic design. Don't care about React. Atomic design was created by Brad Frost. It was chemistry and biology inspired. So it uses things like atoms, molecules, organisms. We're going to rename those for the sake of being developers and not being biologists, but it's going to be close. And it's really focusing on creating a shared language. So when I call it a dropdown, you know immediately what I'm talking about. I was on one project that actually called it a lockup. No idea what that means. No idea where it came from, but it was their version of a dropdown. So we're not going to do that. So first off, we're going to start really, really small. In Atomic Design by Brad Frost, they call them atoms. We're just going to call them elements. If you look at most like packages of like small things where you're just getting buttons, text inputs, fonts, stuff like that, a lot of them have like element put on the tag, right? So these are your building blocks. This is about as small as it gets. If you made it any smaller, it wouldn't be an element anymore, right? So that's kind of the premise. These are used everywhere. They're pretty dumb. They don't do anything really on their own. Like a button just fires an on click. Nice. What you build with those elements are compounds. So again, this is a little like chemistry inspired a little bit, but it's not quite as bad as molecules. So we're not talking about water. We're talking about a text input with a button, also known as a search button, right? Or a search input. Cool. Or we're talking about a login form that has a username text with a password text input. So these are where you're combining, mixing, and matching a couple elements into something else. Again, they're pretty dumb. That search button doesn't actually do the search. It just triggers the on click when you click on it. But the text input does that same thing. You're combining two things because they're related for the need that you have. Water breaks are important. Okay, so the next up is organisms. And so this is where things like start to get intelligent. In React, we're actually going to break this into two things, hooks and modules. So modules are pretty familiar. It's like something you install from NPM. It's a complete set of functionality. You can really think of these as like a form, a complete form that does validation. It has error handling. When you click on the submit button, it actually like does everything except sending the request. Like it'll trigger the action that sends the request, but it's really like you're encompassing all of this functionality into a single thing. And in React, we do that with hooks, where you create the reusable business logic. Things like, let's say you want to keep track of toggling values or like a list of things, a to-do list. You can create a custom hook that just keeps track of a list of strings. Every time I add, it does concat. Every time I remove, it filters it out. Cool, I've got a hook, but I can reuse that over and over again. And then modules is really just the React side of like, hey, I built a component that uses that toggle or that list to build a to-do list. Next up, we have templates. We're just going to call them layouts. This is your grids, your rows, your columns. There's not a whole lot that's sexy about it, so we're going to use some fun names instead to spice it up a bit. But these are, again, pretty dumb. They're really just there to provide structure to your application. And then finally, we have pages. This is kind of like no holds barred, just throw everything you got at it. This is where you're assembling an entire page. You really shouldn't have to maintain much here. It should really just be like, throw this in, throw that in, pull this widget out. That's really what you're supposed to be doing at the page level. Oh, all right, that was a good sprint. Any questions? All right, question? Okay. All right, so we're gonna dive into a workshop. And specifically, we're gonna be kind of rebuilding a very famous UI. Should actually probably start my processes here. Yarn. Okay, so I actually got to boot my local host up. And then this is on the demo branch, so I can do yarn start. Cool. And we'll just give this a second for it to come up. Okay, so they're not exactly the same. I've watched some of my videos that are in my watch later list, so they're not all there. But the general layout's the same. Maybe the color is a little bit different. Actually, when we get to the homepage, YouTube did make an update. So there is a difference here. It used to actually scroll. Now it doesn't. It scrolls up and down. That's really sad. But we can fix that. Anyways, so this is the UI we're going to try to build. I've already built 2, and we've got a 3rd that we're going to work through. So when we're talking about atomic design, this is going to be the really meaty stuff. We really want to talk about what's common, what's similar, what do you see over and over and over again on this page. This is where you get to actually participate too, by the way. I forgot to mention that. Just shout it out. Anything that's the same. Okay, so we got icons, we've got image representations of the videos, so like screenshot or whatever, image tags. What else is similar? Do we see any rows, columns, fonts, colors? So what we're really looking for here is, in React we build components, and we want to start small and add complexity over time. So what we can do is we can create an icon component, and we can give that component props. We can call one of them house, and we're going to use that with the home link. We can call one fire, and we're going to use that with the trending, because trending things are hot. But we can reuse that same icon over and over and over again. When we use these fonts, if we look at this text here and this text here, it's pretty close. It might be the same size, might not. But for an initial pass on a design, or you're doing some rapid prototyping, it doesn't matter if it's 16 pixels or 18. No, you've got a component for that. You can update the styles or update the component definition to go back and make a wide sweeping change across the website. Now, if we take this image, this mental image in our head, and we were to look at the home screen, do we see a lot of those same things? Maybe this time you're seeing the header bar. The header bar is the same between the 2 pages. If we keep going back, the only thing that changes is what's selected over here. On this one, watching later is buried under this menu. But over here, home is exposed. On top of that, we've got the same images, the same previews. So if I mouse over these, I should not see. Maybe watch later doesn't do that. Bad component architecture. They've already done it, right? Like they've got it working on the home screen. Why can't it work on the watch later screen? That's just embarrassing. Anyways, the fonts are the same. Those images are the same. If you were to watch some of these, they typically end up having that progress bar. That's the same. So atomic design really just helps you, as you're looking at these big projects, break them down into those pieces. So enough rambling, we can get started. For those of you that wanted to follow along, have you been able to clone the repo, install npm, yarn start? Following along, nice. Okay, so like I mentioned, I actually have 2 of these local hosts running. One is the app that we want to build. The other is the app in its demo state. So we're missing some video cards here, right? So the first thing we can do is we can actually go into this video card. There's this nice little to-do where we want to start building stuff. But in order for us to build stuff, we got to take an inventory of what we have, right? So because atomic design is the topic of the discussion, and because we love looking at code, we're going to look at this wonderful sidebar. So on an individual project, specifically like the one, maybe even the one I'm working on now, I'm building a design system. I'm not using elements, compounds, hooks, modules. I'm not using that level of distinction yet. I'm actually calling something foundations and components and patterns because it makes sense in the context of what I'm doing. In the context of this presentation, we're talking about atomic design, so I'm going to follow all of the rules except for the naming convention. So under elements, we're really talking about those base pieces again. So you've got an avatar. For me, that's this little ZB with a circle. So it's just a circle with 2 initials. You've got a button. The button is this search bar icon. I don't really use it anywhere else. I just needed it so I can make the UI look the right way. I've got colors. So this is just an object. This doesn't, it's a React project, but it doesn't have to be all React. There's other things that go into this. And it's about picking the right tool for the job. In fact, in the design system that we're building, we need to support other platforms. So the styles are a completely separate project from what we're developing, and we're just consuming those styles. So we don't even have a colors file in ours. Fonts are kind of cool. If you just look at them under the hood, they're, we'll hide that sidebar. They're really just like p tags with some class names and some default props, but that's it. They don't have to be anything more than that. But let's say you want that font to all of a sudden change from an H1 tag to an H2 tag. Everywhere you use the title, you can make that change here. Everywhere else will propagate. Again, we've got icons, images, and text inputs. So that covers most of the kind of baseline pieces that we're looking for, right? We've got our icons, we got our text input, we got an image for here, we got a bunch of fonts. That's kind of all the building blocks. So the first thing we're looking at here is we're actually looking at the card. That's our first compound. It's the first composite component. We're putting a lot of things together to make this video card. So I've got this to do. Oh, and we'll talk about layouts too, because we're going to be using those. So I'll just jump ahead to layouts. We've got this flex component. Basically, I just have a flex.row, flex.column, and that's how I use Flexbox for everything. It's amazing. That's how I use, or that's what I use to align things. So when I look at this video card, what I actually see here is I see an individual row. So the card needs to sit in a row. And then I see an image in a row with this vertical text. So I have a row that is separated into two columns. And on the right column, I actually have two rows. So if we've got that mental image in our head, we can kind of dive in to actually building our video card. So like I said, we start with a row. In this case, we want our video card to be dynamic. I didn't show this actually. So this video card actually scales and changes orientation based on props. So I can make it render in a vertical orientation like this with a bigger image, or I can make it render in the smaller state in a horizontal format just to support those needs. Because again, if I can mouse over here, I should mouse over here. Just saying. I'm really nitpicky about things, I'm sorry. Anyways, so we want to build that card. So we got this, again, mental image. We're going to do some coding. We're going to flip back to this. We're going to go back. Mental image, we want a row. That's that outer wrapper. And we want it to be able to convert to a column. So that's already done. Within that, I need an image. And then I need two things stacked on top of each other. So again, we've got that image component that we already talked about. And I'm not going to pass anything to it. I'm just going to put it in there for now. We're going to pass props later. And then after that image, we know we need another flex. So I need a flex.column because I want the title text to be below or to be on top of the author text. So flex.column. And then within that, we've got a flex.row. And this is like some extra syntax that we'll end up we should be able to delete. But just in case to kind of prove the point, we'd be like, how to make terrain, because that's what the first image on my slide is. And then we'll actually integrate the data in just a minute. And then we can duplicate this because underneath we need to say brackies, because that's this channel. So when we save that, I got to import. Could have sworn I had an Sorry guys, I got this. There it is. Oh, it's because it's missing a prop too. Oh, see this, I'm not used to a light theme, and there's actually a missing closing tag for that flex wrapper there. That's what I messed up. Hey, look, it works. Okay, but my images are way too big. But now if we were to flip between these two, we've already kind of like started working our way there. We've got an image tag, and then on the right of it, we've got the text that we want. The only thing we're missing is the specific fonts that we need, right? So we know we've got something called fonts. It's already imported. And so maybe instead of this, I'm going to say fonts.title. And we'll move that tag to the end. And if we see what that change did, we're like, oh, cool. We've got this sweet, bigger text now. And then we need to figure out whatever this lower one is. For that, I'm going to use the cheat sheet. So if fonts.subheading is what we used. So fonts.title, we want fonts.subtitle or subheading. And again, we'll move that to the end so we can wrap our text in that. I think it was subheading with a capital H. It helps if you type properly. Oh, cool. So now we've got that extra spacing done, or that extra font styling done. And again, this is rapid prototyping. This is what you should be able to do with your component libraries. And this is because you start from the big picture and you identify those little pieces and you start building other things, new designs using those constituent parts. And the cool part is that because you built these small pieces from a larger design system, they all kind of just work together. I don't have to tell this font to align the right way because I've already defined it once. So this is that same font. It's going to behave in one place the same way it behaves in another. But anyways, like I mentioned before, we could probably get rid of these flex row wrappers because by default, they should, yeah, so that'll still line up the way that we expect them to. But one thing that we noticed is that the difference in spacing, one's on the top, one's in the bottom. Well, what if we had a spacer component? So we already went through flex. What I didn't show you was that a spacer component. I just need something to take up space. I don't want to add a margin. I don't want to add padding. I don't want to deal with some crazy flexbox styling where you're doing like justified content, space around, space between. Like all I need is some space. I just want something to like separate those two things. That's all this is. So if I were to put that in the middle of it too, and I were to say flex.spacer, spacer, ooh, what do I call that? This is where TypeScript really helps too. Size, okay. So, and the size needs to be an enum, which is spacer size dot. And so this is a cool thing too. So the way the styles are written is I actually made it so the spacer will like fill space or it'll be a fixed size. So I could do large if I do my autocomplete right. So I could do large. And we'll see what that looks like. It adds a little space. Or I could do like this fill. It doesn't matter because it's going to fill to take all the space. You do that, and it's not going to do what I want. This is where troubleshooting is fun. Flex 1, 1. Oh, it's because I didn't wrap the entire thing in a row. Oh no, it's in the flex column. Where's that div? Oh, so the medium will actually be smaller than the large. So where I had that large, we can see that amount of space. If I do medium, it'll be, yeah, well, it's hardly noticeable, but it's a little bit less space. Cheat sheet, spacer size, fill medium. Oh. So the div around this, I think, is actually shrinking, which is the problem. Yeah. Okay, so the reason that spacer isn't filling to take up space, notes are great, is because it doesn't have any space to expand to. If we're mousing over this, that wrapper, that column that's put in the two fonts on top of each other, it's as small as it's going to get. So I actually made a really cool flex component called fill. So flex.fill.column. And it does the same thing that spacer does. It just grows to take up space. In this case, it's not maintaining a width, but that's an image problem because the image is growing too big. Let me just make sure I get that right. Image source. Actually, let me see if the source should be able to take care of that then. And I mentioned that we had some video. It's in utils. Video list. So this is just an object that I predefined. That way I could iterate and generate everything I need. But if I go in here and I do a source is equal to video list, we'll just take the first one and we'll look at its image URL. That also didn't do it. So maybe we've got a scaling problem. So what did I wrap my column in? Oh, I wrapped it in a column, that's why. So this is the cool thing about Flexbox is if your Flex components aren't doing what they're supposed to, you just put them inside of another one. Oop. And I didn't need that slash. All right, so they shrank down a little bit. They got a little closer to what we're looking for. I think the issue that I have is that I'm doing my image scaling wrong. So I define all my styles to be relative, which allows you to define, like if you're defining everything in ems and rems, it means I can modify the root font size and then everything's going to scale. That's how I achieve that trick of from here, it's one component and it's a really small image. But when I go over to the home page, it's again, same component, just different layout, but the image scales because I defined the size of the image based on ems. Just a little tidbit as we're troubleshooting why my images don't look the way they're supposed to. Okay. Oh, and I didn't even change that back, did I? Yeah, we want that filled, don't we? Sweet. So now it's on the top and bottom. And actually, oh no, I don't want to go back. And actually, I'm not a big fan of the no space around that. So I'm just going to take this column and I'm going to add some padding. No, lowercase. And then I've got an enum for this too. I would highly recommend not using enums to configure React components. That was something I tried for this. It's miserable. You have to import them everywhere. Oh, we'll talk about hot dog and hamburger later. Cool. Okay, so now we got some extra space around there. I'm still not quite sure what I messed up with the image, but that's kind of I can just copy all this. So flex wrapper all the way through there. But that's the gist of that kind of iterative process of how you go about building things in that component kind of space. And I guarantee if you're looking at production code, you're not going to find a render function that's this simple. Like it just doesn't exist. Complexity happens, requirements change. But what you can control is the initial level of complexity. If you can build an entire non-functioning website, like nothing works when I click on it. But if you can rapidly prototype that in 30 minutes, you like git commit that and you've got a perfect starting point. Anytime you try to add functionality, you're like, oh, I need to make sure this link redirects the right way, or this modal opens, or this other thing. Like you've already built the structure. You just have to wire it all together. So that should get it. Okay, so that's making it look the right way. Really, the only thing that was added, so I added this flex behavior called stay. So however big the image is when it first mounts, it's flex 0, auto. So however big the element has to be when it first mounts, like that's how big it stays. It doesn't grow, doesn't shrink. So like with these flexbox behaviors, I'm defining a set of things. So there's grow, there's shrink, there's stay, and then there's auto. So like it's 1 auto, and shrink is 0 1 auto. It's all these things that you're like over time you start to recognize and you start to know like, oh, okay, that's flexbox. But you can encapsulate that inside of the flex component, keep the complexity there and make it simple. So again, like the preferred way of doing this now is actually just stay. That's what my new flexbox components look like. But lesson learned, I was trying to be a little too verbose. But yeah, that's about it. And then here's that magic. So if you pass it in, if you tell it to be a row or a column, this is where it figures out if it wants to be a row or a column. So image on top or image on the side. And then this is all I do, where when it's a row, I add, it looks like the data isn't mapping quite right, or I might have deleted it somehow, but I had like the view count. Whereas then in the vertical, oh, wait, hold on. Oh, so in the column view, it has that view count added. So I've got more space, so I'm gonna show more data. Whereas when I look at the watch later, I don't really have enough space to show the watch count, nor does it really matter. It's not, YouTube's not trying to market the video to me, so they don't need to show me the view count. They don't need me to know that it's a popular video. But that's all that this cool little double ampersand is. I did a lot of talking. I need a water break. Do we have any questions? Have I lost anyone? We've got time. So like questions, concerns, ideas, you want to get up and share the room with me? Like,
Hi, that was really great. Thank you for giving that. I'm curious with this pattern, if you're going to incorporate a third-party library that may have its own interface. Like I was thinking React Select, right, which has its own props that it takes and its own way of setting things up. Would you be inclined to like create your own interface that matches this for React Select or whatever library, or would you just be inclined to like pull that in directly into the system that you've set up here?
Yeah, so I don't actually know what React Select is. It looks like is this like for dropdowns and stuff?
Yeah, it's essentially like a
Okay.
React select options menu.
Yeah, so that's actually a really good point. I'm building a design system and a component library. So I'm starting from the scratch. There's very few utilities that I'm using. Our design system doesn't align with Material UI. It doesn't align with Bootstrap. It doesn't align with Carbon. Like there's hundreds of design systems that we've gone through, and none of the open source ones that we have access to can be styled or themed the way we need. So we decided we're going to build these from scratch. In projects, the concept of atomic design, in my opinion, still exists in the exact same way. So let's say you want to use React Strap, or because you like Bootstrap styling, or you want to use Material UI React because you like Material UI styling. When you use their button, you can either use that button everywhere in your application, so you're importing Material UI into every single page, component, whatever you're using, or you can create your own wrapper component around it. It's an extra step of effort, but the cool part is then you can custom tailor your use of that library however you need. So if Material UI by default on is for a certain button type is making all of your fonts capitalized, but that's a prop that you can configure, like make that wrap that Material UI button in your own button and then use that throughout the application. And then you can set those default props all the time and just say like, no, I don't care if you want to make it capital letters. Our version of this does not accept that. Actually, has anyone seen that pattern with how props are defined and how you can do defaults and overrides? Because I've got that in my icon. So like I mentioned, so in this project, I used Font Awesome. So I am using an external library to support icons. I didn't need to go out and get SVGs for myself. So I just created a base icon, and I'm setting some defaults here. So a lot of people are familiar with like base icon dot default props or dot prop types. I'm used to using TypeScript, so I don't use a lot of the runtime validations, although in this design system we are. But this is kind of like the functional component way of doing default props if you don't want to do the dot notation. So what I'm saying is that I'm going to first pass in a size, a color, and an icon, and then I'm going to merge all of the props I pass to it. So if I pass in a prop for size, it's going to override this. But if I want to set something manually and I never want it to be overridden, I can actually reverse that order. So what I do for each of these components, because I want a menu icon, like I don't want to have to say like icon equals menu everywhere. I just want to use a menu icon. So I spread my props first. I tell it that I want the icon to be the FA bars, and then I give it a size, which means that if any other developer tries to use my menu icon and they give it a different size, I'm going to say nope, and I'm going to pass my own in. So it's a really cool pattern. But yeah, great question. Definitely like use what the community builds. There's like date pickers. Unless you hate yourself, do not build your own date picker. Please do not build your own date picker. Make a to-do list. Yeah. Do we have any other questions? Because we can, again, there's no time limit, so I can keep talking, or I can dive into that trending page. So that was another part of the demo, was we could go to this trending page and we can see how the components we've already built for Watch Later and the home page can allow us to build this. I did it right before the meetup and it took about 15 minutes, but we could walk through that as well.
Cool. So since your last talk, I actually started using Atomic Design and absolutely love it. But one of my concerns is I haven't really considered other design systems. So are there other design systems out there?
Oh yeah.
To consider, or?
Oh yeah. So Atomic Design is not specifically a design system. It's more of like a design philosophy, design methodology. And even on, I had the quote somewhere. I had it saved because I'm giving a presentation on this on Friday in Chicago. That's for work. Don't worry, I'm not crazy. So let me pull my notes up just so I can figure out where I am and actually talk and answer. So Atomic Design is really focused on taking a very large system of whatever. It is about design, but let's say you've got a really complex problem and it's a back-end system, but you've got to wire up that data source and that data source and that data source. But hey, guess what? They're all AWS S3 buckets. You can build an atom that just allows you to pull data from an S3 bucket. Like that's an atom. Or if you're building something with Jenga blocks, like you can start gluing stuff together, make some atoms, reuse those, whatever. Like it's really just about how to break complex systems into smaller pieces. If you want to know about design systems, these are some of the better ones that I've seen. It's by no means a complete list. And there's also another list down here that are not necessarily design systems, but they are like component library focused. Really what we're looking at when you talk about a design system is it's a set of rules and guidelines and kind of like a governance strategy for how you want to establish a brand. So a design system embraces that our brand uses this font, this color, these spacings. Material UI has like an entire thing on typography. So if you just want to like go on for days learning about things about typography you've never heard of, like what the individual pieces are and measurements between like the top of the H and the top of the like actual back piece of the H, like they all have names. None of us know what they are, but there's like a lot of depth to them. And atomic design just helps us break that down. But actually, I can follow that up though with, took way too many notes, because there is maybe styled systems. So I did research, and so the other design philosophies focus more on tech. There's an inverted triangle, for example, and that's a way of structuring, or BEM is what a lot of people are familiar with CSS. If you use the inverted triangle for CSS, what you're really talking about is define all your global styles at the top, because it's cascading and you know how rules overwrite. So define your globals at the top, then define the next level of specificity, which is typically like your HTML tags. So style your button tag directly. And then after that, you look at vague selectors like LIs when they're a child of a list, or sorry, not even that level. You're really focusing on like class names in that kind of vagueness. But if you build your CSS sheets in that way, you get CSS that's reliable and you don't have too many importance that are scattering it. Gosh, there really was, I don't remember where I put all that research. Maybe it's design system approaches. Oh yeah, cool. So IONS. IONS is actually an extension of atomic design. So atomic design doesn't talk about behavior or experiences. And if you think about behavior and experiences, you're talking about hover effects. You're talking about on Material UI, when you click on a button, there's like a little expanding background color that gives this really cool like bloop effect. Like it's really cool. Someone spent a lot of time doing that, but that's not something, atomic design talks about the button. They don't talk about that experience. And so IONS was kind of created, or the philosophy was created to add behavior and experiences on top of that breakdown, so that there was a way of structuring it within the code. Subatomic design is a grab bag, so it actually uses atomic. It uses object-oriented CSS and BEM when it's trying to structure. Like again, it's a little more technology focused, less philosophy, but it has that design system approach kind of mentality. Styled system's pretty dope. I think I'd use this anywhere I'm using styled components. This is like the easiest way to write custom props that dictate the way structure is. Actually, I even have to I gotta show you this. This is so sweet. So you literally like, this is how you define a box that needs to accept like margin props, width props, font size props, layout props, type like color props. You just do that, and your button style system like abstracts away the rest. So you can use the box in all these ways. Or like if you've got like responsive stuff, you can give it an array of things, and then boom, you've got breakpoints. This is, if we weren't building a design system with different rules, like I would use this in probably all of my personal projects if I feel like refactoring the existing ones. Tachyons is just a cool name. I didn't really see anything useful in it. Inverted triangle, again, it's really just about, it's like atomic design in its structure of like start global, get narrow, and then object-oriented CSS. So yeah, long answer to a,
Thank you.
Do we want to see more code, or like we're tired? I totally respect that. I've been doing this all day. Don't want to see any more code type thing. So we have to have like a powwow.
Hi, I was just curious, do you actually have a background in design? Because you've been very nitpicky about things, and like I come from a design background, and like your notes are immaculate too. So I was just wondering.
No, so I got to give a little bit of context. my personality is that I get really, really nitpicky about things and like really frustrated when the things that should be consistent are not consistent. I might have a little bit of OCD. My wife's sitting back there, she's nodding. So I was on a project, same client I'm currently on, but this was for a project a year ago. We had about 9 or 10 developers, and we had 4 or 5 designers. It was small, it was manageable, we knew who was doing what. We tripled the team size, and that's BSAs, that's testers, POs, like you name it, designers, developers, everything tripled because, hey, if you triple team size, you triple velocity, right? But you just like multiplied cost by multipliers. And so what started happening was designers weren't able to, like their tools are just garbage. I'm sorry, like Sketch is great, but if you need to make like a root change to a global design system based on Sketch files, it's just not going to happen. Like our designers hate the fact that I can make a 1-line code change and the entire site updates. And they're like, yeah, I wish I could do that. And so what happened was we would have a root package that all the designers inherited, and they'd start making tweaks. But then this designer on that team would make a component that looked a lot like this one from this team. And so we'd have 2 developers that would make it. And so I started seeing this in code review. I'm like, I'm building a page called soft block, and I'm seeing variables called formulary. Like, why is this happening? And I'm seeing people copy and paste instead of, let's just make these 2 components, or like, let's add a prop to configure that. And so I started like having to pay attention to nitpicky design things. I had to start teaching designers how to think about web, because like we're dealing with boxes. Yeah, you can relative and absolute position things, but try to maintain that, try to scale that, try to make that work always on every device, every screen size. If you want it to actually work everywhere, keep it as simple and clean as possible, and add the complexity later as you go, like, oh, this doesn't work in IE. Cool, go fix that then, don't fix that in the beginning. But that's kind of like that long story for, I almost had to get good at design. Like I can't design for anything. I copied YouTube, and I still didn't do the best job of it. So like, I'm really not the best like kind of creative designer. I'm just really good. I have a really good eye for consistency.
Follow up. What do you use for your notes?
Oh, this is called Notion. If anyone listens to Syntax FM with Wes Boss and Scott Talinsky, Scott uses Notion, and I think Wes Boss is on the bandwagon too. It's nice. I mean, you can write. It's like command based too. So I'll just go into React to Delphia so I don't mess anything of my actual work notes up. But like, if I type in, just get to the root. So if I type in like a slash, it's got all these slash commands, or I can even just, if I want to make a heading, like a H2, I can just hit space after the double hash. So it's doing the markup for me. It does all the like keyboard shortcuts too. So if I want to make this a link, I can hit Command K. Yeah, I don't know. I'm happy with it. It still doesn't do like meeting reminders and stuff. So it's not the greatest tool ever, but keeps my notes organized.
Thanks.
Yeah. Angel.
I got you.
Just a comment, not a question or anything like that. You're doing a really good job. Don't say that you're not a good designer because, like, okay, you said, okay, yeah, you cloned YouTube, but you put this like little. There's like certain aspects of like your design that I can see YouTube going after, and I really think that you shouldn't sell yourself short like that.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess a better way of putting it is my design is, I'm really good at really simple stuff. So like even my website is about as bare. I should probably turn dark mode. Get out of my way. And it's actually not meant to be seen that size. So it's pretty basic. Actually need to update that. So I'm good with the plain stuff. I'll claim like good designer for plain design, but I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I think we had a question in the back. Sorry, Cody, I don't mean to get your steps in.
Hey, you know, it's all right.
With a growing development team and setting forth like a library to do like this rapid prototyping, do you think about like having like a self-building documentation along with the code base so that like you're onboarding new developers, here's the like you were saying that if you have a larger team, you have multiple people developing the same thing. Do you have like a self-building documentation type thing that people can go to as a reference, or just expect everybody to read all the code?
Why not both? No, for seriously though, I think the problem that documentation has is that no developer wants to maintain it, but we all wish it was amazing. So when teams tell you to use tools like Confluence and like other stuff, anything Atlassian, it's not putting the documentation where the code lives. So if you are going to maintain, and I strongly recommend you do that, I recommend using tools that enable documentation to be seamless or just easy to do. So one of the tools that I use most of the time is Storybook. It's not the best tool, but I've used it on most of my projects, and I know how to configure it to write the documentation I need. And I use TypeScript, and there's a React DocGen TypeScript loader, I think that's the full name, that will automatically generate a props table from my TypeScript definitions. So I can write my type definitions that show up in the tooltip for the developer, but also turns into the documentation table for my Storybook file. And then my Storybook file is only responsible for showing the button in its various states and letting a developer kind of like poke around at it. So I definitely recommend like absolutely comment your code. If all that means is writing inline comments to say, hey, don't change this, I don't know what it does, that's better than nothing. If it just means using variable names that make sense instead of letters, like just single letters. I've seen people do it. I do it sometimes. Hell, like for I equals 0, we're going to make a loop like that. But yeah, try to find tools that put the documentation as close to the code as possible. And that way developers are a little more encouraged to do it. They're like, oh, I'm changing this prop. Oh, there's a comment above the prop. I should probably update that. But it's also on the team. The team has to do code review. The team has to care. The team has to pay attention to that. And you're not always going to get buy-in from POs. Even writing tests, writing documentation, you're not always going to get that buy-in. So again, the theme is make it as easy as possible. Automatically generate, like Swagger. God, Swagger's the nicest thing ever. I had a team that wouldn't implement Swagger. It's free. You set it up once and all of your endpoints are documented. Like, there's no reason not to.
So do you know of any libraries? So like, for example, I've worked in pretty heavy SaaS projects, and I've used KSS, which allows you to turn the comments on classes in CSS into like a Bootstrap style documentation site.
Oh yeah.
You know anything like that for React components?
I don't. I've tried finding some alternatives. Most of them end up being showcase type platforms where you still have to write, like Storybook. You have to write the story. You have to do. There is some level of manual effort. Yeah, the closest I found is Storybook plus React DocGen TypeScript loader, because that at least pulls the TypeScript comments out. If you're doing prop validation or you're not using TypeScript, like, sorry. So that is one of the things that's desperately needed in the React community, is something that helps automate just generating documentation.
I'm working on a school project using React, and I'm kind of new to React, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around things like components and then trying to put this in context with your atomic design presentation. How would you, in terms, like this is a very simple question, but
That's
like,
fine.
what are components when you put it in like an atomic design principle mindset?
Yeah, so I can show you a couple things. So we have core components here. So we've already got the design system and component library I'm building is based off of an existing project, the one I was just on, all the components that we needed. And we got rid of a bunch of things that were like e-commerce specific, because we want to support more than just an e-commerce platform. So there were things like the concept of a cart doesn't exist on other, like just static content sites or something. So we're not building those. But from that, we broke it down into like these core ones. And even of these, I wouldn't call them all required. And I'll blow this up a little bit. So if we're talking about like at the smallest level, every application needs typography, colors, spacing, and like potentially theming. This is kind of that optional extra if you want to go above and beyond. But like you need colors, you need fonts, and you need spacing. It's not a website without any of those. Or maybe it's an online game. So I spoke too soon. I wouldn't really worry about behaviors. Motion is something that you learn for fun. You should be able to do it as a developer. You should be able to pick it up. But it's one of those skills that if it helps you stay inspired, do it. If you're just learning it for the sake of learning it, there's other things that you can spend your time on. Buttons, text inputs. I make a dropdown, like nothing fancy, just make it using select and option tags. Lists are always good because they're everywhere. And then maybe something like a little more advanced, like an accordion, which when you click on it, like a drawer will slide down and show additional content. But that's kind of it. It's buttons, a couple form elements, typography, fonts, colors, spacing, an accordion, and that builds a lot of layouts. So rows and columns. You're going to use those everywhere. Everything's in a row. Everything's in a column. That's like most of it. And you can really when you're learning and you want to find out what the core pieces are, look at just a login form. Look at a new user sign up form. Look at a credit card or like a checkout like details page. When the only thing you have to do is like confirm that, yeah, I want to buy all these things. And typically those are some of the most plain pages because they don't want to advertise to you at that point. They don't want to distract you from hitting that like, yeah, buy this product. Ooh, I got really loud. So they try to keep those pages simple, or even just view something on a mobile. If you've got a really good mobile website experience, those tend to be really, really pared down. And so whatever shows up on mobile is probably something that's core and integral. And you can use atomic design to kind of break it down into, is this an element, a compound, an atom, a molecule, whatever naming convention works.
Thank you.
And that's another point too. Like with atomic design, I'm using foundations, components, and patterns and behaviors. I'm not using atoms, molecules, and so on. It's because that doesn't make sense in the context of what I'm doing. So that's the biggest part about atomic design is not actually the naming convention. It's just make sure you have one. Make sure you have some process or some set of rules that allows you to take this really big thing and turn it into constituent pieces that you can use over and over and over again to rapidly build, change, modify, maintain a website or application or whatever you're building.
I have a question. So we're starting to sort of like really ramp up our style guide stuff here at Guru. And some of the stuff that I've heard from other talks, I heard a style system talk from the perspective of a designer recently, and it was kind of a lot of the same things. Like it saves you a lot of time, it keeps things consistent. But like one thing that I think is sort of important that you brought up was that you're speaking the same language. Like the developers are like, when you talk about one component, you're talking like everyone knows what that is. In your experience, how much, like I suspect that it's also very important that the language that developers are talking about for those components, the design team is also sharing that same language so that when you're sort of like speccing out projects, you're both talking about the same things, you know what exists and what you can do really fast. From like a practical perspective, like in your experience, how, like, where do you sort of draw the line there? Like, have you had design teams know about like your like flex column and row components, like that far like in the weeds, or like what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it's definitely like a blend of both. There are certain things that don't translate between design and development. Hooks don't exist in design. Business logic isn't a design thing because they're not concerned with, hey, you're running an e-commerce platform. No, they care about customer experience. They care what the customer sees when they go to the website and what they feel and how they interact with it. They really don't care if you create a hook called use toggle. So there are things that developers need to keep separate. For the most part, it's whatever the constituent pieces are, because the ideal scenario is you have a designer and a developer in a room and they do what we just did. Hopefully, like I have to apologize. I haven't touched this repo in like 2 months. I built it all like 2 months ago, being really proactive. And then I didn't do anything until like 2 days ago. But once you've kind of worked in a design system for 6 months, the terminology should be consistent. And so what you should be able to do is on a whiteboard, you've got a designer saying like, okay, so here's our page and I'm going to draw this like button here. And I've got a modal that pops up that looks like this. It's got a title. It's got 2 buttons on the bottom for submit and cancel. And it's a sign up form. So it's got these elements, but like it's a rough wireframe, but they said modal, they said button, they said label, they said text input, or they said input. And you're making sure that what they are saying right there is what the developer is going to leave that meeting and say, oh, I'm using my text input, or I'm using my input. And so even in that room, you should be able to rapidly prototype based on what the designer is saying. And so some of it's going to be the designer saying like, yeah, that's just what designers call it. They call it typography. You can call it fonts all you want, you plebeian, but we're going to call it typography. And sometimes you'll just have to submit and you'll put it in a folder called typography and you'll call it fonts in your project. It's like, that's going to happen. The big point is just making sure that in general, you're maintaining as much of the same language as possible and you have as few translations as possible. So like the lockup and a dropdown, we just accepted it. They got the POs on board, the testers, everyone was calling it a lockup and us developers were just holding out. We're like, no, that's a dropdown. I see what that is. So there's definitely some times when that breaks down.
Thank you. Any other questions? Question down
One
here.
up front.
All right.
Hey man, thanks for your presentation. I've definitely just been like blown away this like whole time. But I'm sorry, this is like a fairly remedial question. I was just sort of like seeing what you were doing with like those like button components earlier, where you're sort of like doing that thing where you're like passing props or you're like overriding and stuff like that. And it just kind of reminded me of like some things that I was doing personally at work that I actually like really found to be like a little bit complex, where it's sort of like this, you know, a thing like that where what I was working on was like a button that I was just passing some props to, like an on click or something like that. But I really got like overwhelmed by like the variety of buttons and stuff like that. I was just sort of wondering like if it took you a while to like adapt to writing this. And I'm sorry, this is like a remedial question. It's just I've like personally like tried to do this with like a button and I found it to be like so overwhelming that I actually like converted it back to like just like regular buttons. I don't know.
No, that happens to all of us. Most of these components I've built a dozen times, like professional and personal projects. So certain things just come to me because I'm like, oh, I did this once, I'm going to do it the same way. I don't have a reason to change my approach. But there are others where it's a brand new thing and I've got to figure that out. I'm actually on my project. I have a junior developer that has never touched React. He comes from a Java and C# background, and he's been developing in Xamarin, which is a mobile platform. So he's coming from a mobile like backend language OOP background, and I've got to teach him React. So we're running into a lot of those types of things where he's just like, I get that it's just a button tag, but how do I add padding? Like, well, you just use a class name because I've already defined that style. So like, do I pass that in as a prop? I'm like, no, like you just say the class name, padding large. And so there's like, that's a thing that happens is trying like the complexity of trying to translate that and how you would break things down to solve a problem. Like that's very real and we all experience it. The biggest strategy, and am I on the right track to answering your question? I want to make sure. Okay. The general strategy I have, and I actually posted this in the Philly JavaScript like Slack, and I also tweeted about this, asking like, if you were given a couple different ways of consuming a component, what would they look like? So for me, like the traditional way is button variant or type is equal to primary, and then we've got a button. Another way is saying primary button. Same thing. Or I could say button, or buttons, because this has been namespaced, and I want the primary one. Now, these two don't really have much difference. This one's definitely different. The way I would implement this as a developer on the component library side is different than the way I would develop these two. And so the way I try to break some of these problems down of like when I'm trying to solve something technically from the development and maintenance side, I really just think about how a consuming developer wants to do it. And that helps narrow the possibilities. So instead of me having to worry about props and like, oh, what type of button am I dealing with? I'm really just focusing on like, I'm just going to export a primary button. That's what you get. And when you make those rules or you make those decisions of like how someone's going to have to consume your component, it helps you focus on like, oh, well, maybe maintaining state isn't something a button should do. So I'm not going to include that level of complexity in my button. You know, a button is only responsible for rendering text and submitting or like firing an on-click event. In a simple world, that's all it's responsible for. And so that's what you can focus on is that's what my button does. That's what I'm making it do. That's how I solve this problem. When you get to more advanced things like accordions, there's a million ways you can solve that. You can do it in purely CSS. You can do it in functional JavaScript where you've got like a hook that maintains state and you conditionally render a component. You can do it as a mix of both. And in that, again, I go, well, how is a consuming developer expected to do this? Is it a set of functionality that like accordion, boom, it all works? Or is it something where they actually need to configure it and then they just pass specific props? And then certain things will start to identify themselves as you're working through that process of breaking something down of like, how are they going to use it? How's the consuming developer going to use my component? Did I beat the dead horse?
No, it was great. Thank you.
Got another one over here.
Hey Zach,
Hey.
just curious.
Hey, Courtney.
How many different projects have you guys applied atomic design to, and have you noticed any pain points as you've been using this?
Yeah. So this is my third professional project that we've used atomic design. And then I've got a handful of personal ones, like including this meetup project. The biggest issue I see most of the time is language. People get caught up on atoms, molecules, organisms, and they go, oh, okay, well, where does an accordion go? Well, let's like not think about that at that level. Let's think about the process, because you don't want an organism folder in your code base, because it doesn't, unless you're building a biology app, like it doesn't make sense. So look at what you're trying to build, and you don't always have complete designs, but hopefully you've got an idea, a rough idea. You even just point like, make it look like Facebook, make it look like Google, make it look like whatever. You need something like baseline reference. And then what you can do from there is you can break it down. So, and here's a wild idea. Maybe a button isn't your atomic component. A button isn't the core. Maybe a search box with like an input and a button actually is the smallest piece in your system. Just make it. Don't make a button and an input. Make an input button and just use it. If you ever need both or like one independent of the other, you can always just cut that code out, make another component and do it again. So language is number one. Like people just don't connect the dots between like what they're doing in atomic design. They think it's too rigid when it's really not supposed to be rigid. The other thing that I experienced most often was just pushback of why. They were like, well, my system works and I like my components folder with 200 components at the root level. And then by the way, I've got some folders here for the more complex components, but you see that folder was created because we just had too many files that said card with button, card with label, card with. So those are really the two pushbacks, is people just didn't get the language and they didn't understand why they cared. Like they're just, cool, I'm gonna keep doing what I've been doing.
A little follow-up question. Have you ever seen atomic design done without React or any frameworks, just vanilla?
Oh yeah. So they, Brad Frost. So he actually built a pretty cool website. This might be for the book. That is for the book. Chapter 2, table of contents. Oh, Pattern Lab, there it is. Okay, so Brad Frost actually created this. It's called Pattern Lab. Let me get the dark mode off so we can see it in all its glory. And this is actually another good representation of like what's different. So this is, gotta remember how to navigate this site. Documentation. Wow. Oh, overview of patterns. There it is. Sorry, I haven't been on here in a little bit. So like he goes really in the weeds, and like his entire, like this is his lifeline. He created Atomic Design. He's got an ebook. Highly recommend reading it, buying it too if you can. You can read it for free. But he's like, this is what he lives in. And so I want to find, it might be in the demo actually. Yeah, this is it. So you can actually click on here and you can see like buttons for him are global. And so you can click on the button and I'll zoom this in and like, boom, there's your button or your molecules. He thinks that forms constitute a molecule. So if you want to see what a field looks like, that's what a field looks like. If you want to see a list, this is a media list. And so this is his way of breaking things down and based on his own system. So it's a really cool project to kind of poke around in and see, like, again, what the creator of the method came up with.